Hello and welcome to the September 28th edition of Ukraine Without Hype. I'm Anthony Bardaway, here with Romeo Kuznetsov.
Hey, folks.
Just starting off with some announcements. Of course, if you would like to support this podcast, please go to patreon.com/Ukraine Without Hype. I'll be putting out the newsletter tomorrow. And I would also like to announce that I will be making a month-long-ish trip to America soon. So there could be some interruptions in the scheduling next month. I'll be trying to smooth them over with some evergreen content. But while I'm there, I'll try to talk to the Ukrainian American community. Not very large where I'm going, but I'll see what I can angle in. And I don't know, checking in on America for the first time in a few years.
Ooh, going back to Babylon.
Going back to Babylon. So I don't know if I'll make any America-specific content while I'm there. I'd also like to announce that the Penn State University Extension is doing a webinar series titled The Impacts of the War in Ukraine on the People and the Environment, about the many, many environmental impacts that this war has had on the land of Ukraine itself. We've covered this topic a few times, especially in the context of the Kherson floods, of the destruction of wildlife refuges. There was a lot of wildfires going on, especially right now. Fall of every year is kind of when there's a lot of fires caused by peat bog fires, by farming-related fires. And since this war has been in its full-scale stage, of course, fires caused by artillery and explosions of various kinds. This is happening also because the wilderness in these areas is not exactly being tended to, so any irrigation or cleaning of brush or anything like that would typically happen and would constrain some of these fires has gone out of control. So just recently, these fires have been quite thick, leading into the air quality of Kyiv taking a sharp decline. Again, common part of this year, but the war makes it so much worse. So I'll be leaving a link in the description to this Impacts of the War in Ukraine on the People and the Environment. And with that, on to our combat update. I'll start by talking about Kursk because the last time we gave an update on them, the Russians were doing a counteroffensive to try to push Ukrainian forces away from various sensitive sites. And the only real update there is that counteroffensive has so far petered out. It has stagnated and the situation has stabilized. The Russians tried to remove Ukraine from the area by the end of September. That obviously did not happen. If they will make another attempt, if they will try to wait it out for winter, we don't know, but the fighting is, as always, ongoing. Another smaller portion of the front line to give an update on is Bakhmut. We haven't really talked much about the Bakhmut front in a long time just because not so many changes compared to other parts of the front line. However, at this point, the town of Klishivka, which we talked about extensively during the Ukrainian counteroffensive following the fall of Bakhmut, most of this town of Klishivka is now in the gray zone. The Russians don't really hold it, but neither do the Ukrainians. Now, strategically, I think what is likely happening there is that the Ukrainians are falling back to positions along this canal. We've talked about the canal in the context of Chasiv Yar. The Russians have not been able to get past the canal in the eastern portions of Chasiv Yar, but Ukrainians still hold positions to the south of Chasiv Yar on the other side of the canal. This is a vulnerable position, and it has not been going great for the Ukrainians, but they have been holding it off. We will likely see in the course of the coming colder months that the canal will become an all-out just defensive line with not much beyond it. That is the direction that it's going in. But the main update to talk about this week refers to Vuhledar. Vuhledar, as we've gone over, is the linchpin of the southeast part of the front. It is where, as I say, the line goes from being west to east to being north to south, and Vuhledar kind of holds that shape together. However, at this point, the Russians have surrounded it on three sides. It is nearly enveloped, and a lot of commentators are predicting that Vuhledar will only last for another few weeks. This is not a large town. So it's not losing like a major population center so much as it is losing a very important strategic strongpoint. Past Russian attempts to conquer Vuhledar have led to extremely high casualties on their part, and the road leading to Vuhledar from the Russian positions has been basically a suicide path that they have gone on. That is turning around during the massive Russian offensives that are currently happening. Without the ability to reinforce Vuhledar, it is slowly losing ground. And like I said, enveloped, which means that it may be time to pull out. And many commentators are calling for a pullout to happen before the worst case scenario. There have been some reports that various units had been pulling out of that position, that those reports had then been countered by saying, no, these guys are still there. And it's all been very confusing information, black hole of who exactly is holding Vuhledar and for how long. And as for Russia's longer range strikes, one just happened today, the day of recording, in Sumy. The Russians did a double tap attack on a hospital, which is where they attack it the first time around, waited about half an hour for rescuers to be on scene and working to rescue people, and then launched another missile to hit that hospital. Double tap, as it is called. So far we know that 9 are dead, and more are injured. These double taps are quite common. Russia does it many, many times, and it is designed to make it so that any rescuer that may show up, basically make it impossible to even be a first responder. In many cases, first responders can't go to a scene because they know a double tap is going, so people that might have been able to be rescued instead will die because anyone who approaches them will themselves be killed. This is, of course, a war crime, but no one seems to do anything about Russian war crimes. The other long-range attack that Russia did was on Izmail. Izmail is a town on the border with Romania in the southwest of the country along the Danube River, where the Danube exits into the Black Sea. Russia had done a lot of drone attacks on Izmail in the past, especially during the Black Sea blockade, when Ukraine was not able to use the Black Sea to export any goods, and tried to figure out a way around that by instead shipping them up the Danube River through the port of Izmail. However, because Ukraine was able to break that Black Sea blockade by destroying about a third of the Black Sea fleet and destroying their headquarters, and to the point where now exports out of Odessa port are roughly the same as they've always been, so attacks on Izmail had slowed down because it's just no longer as critical. However, the Russians did do some strikes, and this week was one of them. A drone hit an apartment building, killing 3 people and injuring 14. Most of the dead were quite elderly. So Izmail, due to the course of the war, had been deemed much safer than it had been because, again, of this breaking of the Black Sea blockade. But safe is never truly safe. It always comes back. And now on to what I think is going to be the headline topic for this episode, which is that Putin kind of made an official declaration of greatly lowering the bar for the use of nuclear weapons. I will now quote his statement. It is proposed that aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear state, but with the participation or support of a nuclear state, be considered as their joint attack on the Russian Federation. The conditions for Russia's transition to the use of nuclear weapons are also clearly fixed.
All right, to translate that from kind of Soviet bureaucraties to normal language, what Putin claims is their new policy is that specifically that the nations aiding Ukraine in its defense against Russian aggression will be considered to be attackers of the Russian Federation, not just Ukraine. Now, this isn't exactly a new thing. Russian propaganda has been kind of drilling down their point or their lie that this is a NATO versus Russia war. They constantly talk about British and Polish mercenaries. Whenever there's a Ukrainian advance or whatever, the Russian propagandists are constantly attributing this to foreigners for some reason. They're constantly threatening the UK in particular for whatever reason. Russians really have a love-hate relationship with the United Kingdom. And so this has been kind of a feature of the full-scale invasion since February 2022. It's never not been a thing that Russia has not considered the nations aiding us to somehow also be attacking Russia. Though, obviously, that is not true because Russia is currently invading no other country. Russia has not committed to military operations against any of the countries that have provided Ukraine munitions or arms or aid or support of any kind. So, obviously, just by their actions, this is all bullshit. They have proposed so many red lines, things like, okay, if you attack Russian territory, this is a red line that authorizes the use of nuclear weapons. Well, when Ukraine does counterattacks and what Russia legally or by Russian law considers to be its territories, this is the occupied territories in Zaporizhia, in Donetsk. Officially, they passed a law that says these are inalienable parts of Russia, though obviously they're not really. It's just more bluster. And as you see, Kyiv has not gotten nuked, nor has anything else. Then the red line shifted to, okay, if you attack Crimea with Western weapons, with Western missiles, we will consider this an attack on Russia proper. It happened. Nothing happened. Now, Ukraine has actually occupied a chunk of Russia proper in Kursk Oblast, and the Russians still are not using their nuclear weapons. Now, there's a couple of reasons why that might be. The first one, and I would say the most obvious one, is it's a lie. It's a bully sending schoolyard threats. I mean, the bully has, in theory, access to nuclear weapons, and we'll talk about that in theory portion in a second. But Russia is not going to nuke anyone. They are never going to nuke anyone. They want to continue to exist. And if there is one thing I think that we can rely on in this world, at least so far, is the norm of no use of nuclear weapons. It bears repeating, and I've said this many, many times. If we do use, or rather, if nuclear weapons are used in a non-existential way that is tactically or aggressively or what have you, all bets are off, and the country that launched the nukes is likely going to get nuked by everyone else, regardless of whether the other nuclear countries are currently its allies or enemies. Because, quite frankly, no one wants to live in a world where the use of nuclear weapons is normalized. Not even the most cynical, amoral bastards want to live in that world. It's not a nice world. It's hard to enjoy the fruits of oppression when one lives in a post-apocalyptic nuclear wasteland. So no one wants to break that norm. There's a reason that norm has held since World War II. No one wants to break it. Russia doesn't want to break it either. Another big reason why Russia is not going to nuke Kyiv, it's because it's very close. Belarus is close. Kyiv is close. By the scales of nuclear weapons, these things are close. Now, I've spoken to nuclear experts that assure me that the fallout is less than what people claim, and that actually you can use low yield nuclear weapons without that much fallout that'll affect a neighboring country. But at the same time, one, we've never used nukes past World War II, aside from tests, which have often gone wrong, like Russia's discovered. Again, we'll get to that in a second. And two, it is still a risk. When Chernobyl melted down, the effects were felt as far away as Greenland. Like, people's Geiger's counters were going off in Greenland. You cannot tell how weather dispersal or how weather patterns are going to disperse the radiation, what winds are going to push things where. You can model for that for the best, but it is a major, major risk. As a result, you kind of want to use nukes as far away from your shores as possible, and Ukraine, being a neighboring country, is not that. And finally, we get to possibly one of the biggest reasons Russia is not going to use a nuclear weapon, because it may not have functional ones. So in order to Russia knows that it's been blustering a lot. It knows that it's set a bunch of red lines. It knows that Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian president and current kind of number two in the Russian Federation, pretty much every night gets soused on a bottle of 5 of vodka and starts writing nuclear threats against London. Like, these are just things. It knows it does these things. And it knows that when you bluster a lot and nothing happens, people eventually begin to discount the threat. So in order to kind of give a bit of substance to their nuclear bullying, the Russian Federation recently conducted a test of a Sarmat ICBM intercontinental ballistic missile, also known as the Satan II. The Sarmat is claimed to be the most advanced ICBM in the world, but of course, these claims are being made by the Russian Federation. And you can look at how their vaunted Armata tanks are doing in Ukraine if you want to see how Russian high technology really functions in practice. In fact, you can look at this very test. On September 21st, they attempted a test launch of a Sarmat ICBM, and it blew up on the launch pad. It blew up very, very messily, very, very loudly, and very, very obviously. Now, and this, it was presumably supposed to be their most advanced ICBM. The grand majority of the Russian nuclear arsenal are inherited weapons from the Soviet Union, which have likely been subject to the same corruption, the same degradation of capability that the rest of the Russian military has gone through. Prior to the full-scale invasion, one of the reasons people, even informed people, were discounting it is because the Russians parked a bunch of their armor in Belarus and then left it out in the rain and the weather without any cover for seasons on end. And when the Russians tried to get them to move, half their tires were like blown out or routed away because, well, you have to take care of things for them to work, especially if you're going to leave them in one place for a long period of time. The Russians don't do that. They don't really do maintenance. Maintenance is money that you're not stealing. A maintenance budget can also be thought of as a bureaucrat's personal wallet. That is the purpose they exist. The purpose of a maintenance budget is not to ensure the continued operation of whatever that maintenance budget is meant for. It is to serve as a personal wallet that no one will ever look into. It is by far completely likely that the same dynamic that we've seen everywhere else in Russian society, in the Russian military, in the Russian government, in Russian business still completely applies to their nuclear forces as well. And if their largest, most vaunted, most quote-unquote advanced weapon blows up on the launch pad, well, is that a risk you want to take when you're trying to launch one of these missiles for real? Because if a nuclear-powered country notices, and they will notice, we have satellites, lots and lots of satellites watching every single known Russian nuclear launch site. If those missiles start moving and then they don't launch, they suffer a failure to launch, there is some catastrophic error, the other nations will treat that as the same as the launch of an actual nuclear weapon, and Russia will be equally hosed. You don't launch these things unless you are beyond 100% sure that they will work, that they will go off, and that no one can interfere or inflict preventative damage to ensure that they're non-operational.
Yes, on the flip side, though, it really only takes one to kill thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of people. So we can say that their nuclear system is probably completely rotted out, but at 100% capacity, they can kill half the world. And if at only 5% capacity, they can destroy 2% of the world, that's still a lot of dead people. However, ultimately, the reason why Russia will not use nuclear weapons is, as you said, if you are the one who presses that big red button, or hypothetically, it's not an actual big red button, but you get my point. If you're the person who presses that big red button, you are essentially committing suicide. You press that button, you kill yourself. That's not something that a lot of people go through the rational decision making to do.
It also interferes with one of Russia's main claims in this full-scale invasion. Remember, from the Russian perspective, they aren't aggressors. They are fixing a historical mistake, as the Russians believe it. But part of this narrative is them pushing to, especially to developing world and third world countries, that they are an anti-imperialist force resisting American hegemony. And as a result, they always try to present their demands, the subjugation and enslavement of Ukraine, as something rational, reasonable, as something minimal even. You'll hear politicians, even in the West, constantly talk about how Russia wants to make a deal, how Ukraine must make concessions, how war is awful, and we need to come to some kind of agreement with Russia. And Russia loves putting forward that they're the peacemakers. They're the ones that want peace more than anyone in the invasion that they started 10 years ago by seizing parts of another country. They're the normal ones, and it's the Ukrainians and their NATO partners that are the warmongers. They're the bloodthirsty children killers, despite the fact that Russia has leveled multiple facilities full of children with ballistic missiles. However, when you are constantly threatening nuclear Armageddon, that tends to kind of interfere. These narratives don't really mix well. I am an unhinged maniac who is willing to use to start World War III over, chunks of a neighbor's country I don't even care about, versus I am a peacemaker and all I want is for the imperialism to stop and for everyone to kiss and make up. Like those things don't work together. And as a result, Russia really has to thread this kind of narrative line of, yeah, we're reasonable, peace-loving people, but also we're going to nuke you if you don't let us do a genocide.
Countries fail at doing invasions and occupations all the time, and they don't nuke the country that they just lost a war in. The United States is a major nuclear power. We did not nuke Afghanistan as we were leaving. The Soviet Union, of course, was a nuclear power. They did not nuke Afghanistan when they were leaving. Douglas MacArthur wanted to nuke China when the Korean War was drawing to a stalemate. Everyone realized that was insane. We did not nuke Vietnam. We did not. That's just not how this works. And I also remember that the first time that they used these nuclear threats, or at least in a large scale way, was after they had illegal referendums that we're referring to, where they annexed of the 4 new territories, as they call them. And they said that if Ukraine launches an attack on anything in Russia's territories, including the new territories, we'll consider that an attack on Russian sovereignty and therefore use nuclear weapons to protect our sovereignty. Well, Ukraine recaptured Kherson. Nothing happened. They threatened nukes over the F-16s. Nothing happened. Again and again and again. These are empty threats and nothing happens. But so why do they do it anyway? And it is purely for propaganda purposes. They know that people are afraid of people saying the word nukes. They know that it is able to get into various parts of civil society in countries that are supporting Ukraine and get them very afraid and give them talking points to use. If we don't let Russia conquer Ukraine and destroy them as a people, then they'll start World War III and we're all dead. So it's better to just sacrifice the Ukrainians, let them all die so that we may live. That is essentially what the threat is.
And it's a very potent narrative. I've had a number of media interviews in the past few weeks, and every time one of the main questions I've been asked are, how credible are the Russian nuclear threats? When a nuclear power starts blustering about using its nukes, people tend to take notice. And that notice often leads to statements by politicians saying exactly what you just said, that, oh, we should sacrifice Ukraine in order to save the greater chunk of humanity, or whatever other idiotic garbage they conceive of. But again, it's purely a propaganda tactic. It is bluster. Russia will not use nuclear weapons, and that's even if any of the nuclear weapons they still have are functional. And if we go by the results of the Sarmat missile test, I'm not sure about that one, Chief.
And just to cap off this segment by saying that, as with many things involving Russia, this relies on tired cliches. People say, well, look at the Cuban Missile Crisis. That nearly brought us to nuclear Armageddon. There is zero relationship between what's happening now and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis was 2 sets of nuclear powers who were openly threatening nuclear war with each other, and a series of very well-defined red lines that the other side was not backing down on for a while. And it involved, again, the placement and usage of nuclear weapons. The purpose of nukes is to stop other people from using their nukes. That's it. There is no relationship here. Ukraine does not have nuclear weapons. Therefore, there is no risk of a nuclear standoff between Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine used to have nuclear weapons until the Budapest Memorandum led to Ukraine giving them up in exchange for Russia and the United States recognizing the borders of Ukraine and vowing to protect them if they came under threat. We saw how well that went. And if Ukraine still had those nukes, well, maybe history would have played out differently. This situation right here does not involve nukes. Therefore, it won't involve nukes. Moving on. And as a bridger here, referring to another case of Russian equipment not doing so great, even in its most prestigious forms, the good old Admiral Kuznetsov, Old Smoky, Russia's only aircraft carrier. This aircraft carrier has been degrading over time. It's been a long-running joke in the Russia watching sphere because wherever it goes, it belches out huge clouds of smoke and leaves all the water around it polluted, probably forever. It is a disgusting hulk of machine.
Oh, and don't forget about the damage it itself causes to surrounding equipment.
Oh, yeah.
Not only is the thing itself degrading, rusting away, just generally disintegrating before your eyes, it also inflicts that effect on everything around it.
And in fact, serving on such a ship is so disgusting that many of the crew end up developing various diseases and cancers from just straight up main-aligning radioactive heavy metals.
But don't worry, Russian sailor. Are you sick of working in an environment heavily contaminated by heavy metals, lead, and possibly even radiation? Are you tired of random unexplained diseases and injuries that your doctors refuse to even look at? Well, worry no more. Just go to your commander and talk to him about the war in Ukraine. And soon you'll be off that shit and on the front lines, serving Mother Russia in the trenches as a storm assault unit. Doesn't that seem just like the best move? And I am not being facetious. There have been, in fact, reports that, mind you, the Kuznetsov is not an operational vessel. It has been in dry dock. It's not doing anything. It's just kind of sitting there and rusting. And so its crew doesn't really have anything to do. As a result, there have now been numerous reports of members of the crew of the Admiral Kuznetsov, which you would think, serving on your country's only aircraft carrier. Surely that's a prestigious post. Not anymore. Welcome to the storm assault units. They're being used to plug holes and rush at fortified positions with nothing but grit and a burning desire to do fascism.
Yeah, it's kind of a silly story overall. Just the absolute misery that these people live. Like, the way I see it, everyone involved in this was going to die an early death from like 4 different types of cancer that they got from serving on this ship. And so maybe being put into a storm unit and being blown up by a drone is referable, less painful overall in the grand scheme of things. What a miserable, miserable existence it is to be a Russian soldier or sailor.
It's almost like they should stop and maybe solve some of their problems at home. They have guns. I'm just saying, if you have guns and you're being oppressed, you yourself hold the solution to your oppression.
Really, if you're a sailor, just get off the boat at a different port one day. That's what a lot of the Soviet sailors did. It seems.
Well, granted, I don't think the crew of the Kuznetsov are really sailing around a lot of ports, Anthony. I feel like
fair
they're
enough.
kind of just sitting in dock forever.
Well, thinking upon that, moving on to our final topic of this episode, which was President Zelensky visiting the United States. The purpose of this visit was basically just to talk to Congress, present his peace plan that we had gone over before. It's basically more of a PR than anything else. There's no real potential for negotiations or anything like that in the near future. The peace plan is there because the Americans need to have a plan to look at. It's basically just checking off marks. And for that reason, we often don't cover Zelensky's visits to America because they're just rote. As a journalist, they're very boring to talk about unless something big happens. And, well, kind of big stuff happened. So President Zelensky was visiting a munitions plant in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
That is the hometown of U.S. President Joe Biden.
And also the hometown of the TV show The Office, probably what it's more famous for in Ukraine. Ukrainians love The Office. So in this munitions plant, it had been starting up. There's a lot of these munitions plants showing up in America and Western Europe. They're slow going, but the gears are slowly turning. Production is going up as time goes on. And the gap between Western production of war material and Russian and their allies has been closing because of this. It just takes a while. And Zelensky was showing his appreciation for the workers in Scranton for doing this.
He very famously signed one of the artillery shells as part of a photo op, which many commentators did not like, claimed that it was somehow inhuman. Full disclosure, Ukraine Without Hype has signed artillery shells. We are happy to send signed artillery shells to the fascist enemy.
It was ridiculous complaints, and a lot of people were convinced that they're...
How dare you celebrate the weapons that kill fascists?
Yeah, a lot, for whatever reason, people believe that these were being used by Israel. And I don't know, but I don't believe Israel is using mass artillery barrages as a part of their strategy.
Why would Zelensky be citing artillery shells?
What is the context? What is the context here? But people are stupid. It's stupidity, and I don't even know how to have an answer to that. But this whole story is basically about stupidity, so that's where we begin. And at this photo op, there is also the governor of Pennsylvania, Shapiro, who was in the running to be vice president candidate, but was set aside for Waltz. But immediately thereafter, every single Republican lost their minds. This was referred to as election interference.
Anthony, are you implying that the GOP has minds to lose?
That's a good point. But also, they were flipping several types of shit on this scenario, and we're saying this.
I'm just saying, I'm not sure they're self-aware. Do you think if you showed Mike Johnson a mirror, he would recognize the other person? Like, has anyone conducted the cat test? You know, you hold your cat in front of the mirror and you see if your cat does anything with the reflection. I really feel like we need to do this for the GOP because, again, I don't really see a lot of evidence of self-awareness, and that's concerning.
Yeah, ultimately, this was just a knee-jerk reaction. This was being referred to as election interference by Ukraine, but the only reason why they do that is because the Republicans are addicted to the "I know you are, but what am I" defense.
I want to keep repeating this because I constantly see people make this fallacy. The Republicans are not interested in the security of the United States of America. They are not interested in improving the security of the U.S. They don't care about national defense. The only thing they care about is putting Donald Trump in power and doing transgenocides. They really couldn't give less of a shit about anything else. And they hate Ukraine because Ukraine, being such a morally obvious black and white conflict, forces them to take a side. Either they side with the Democratic Party against the United States' generational enemy in the Russian regime, or, and this is the option the Republicans have obviously chosen, they simply claim that national defense and national security and keeping democracy together is, in fact, somehow un-American. And what is American is to give Putin a hearty rub in the back. That's the most American thing you can do, according to the Republican Party. They really despise Ukraine. They love Russia. They love Putin. They want to emulate Putin. They think he's an amazing leader and a great guy. And it's not just me saying this. Donald Trump, the former president and current Republican candidate for president once more, literally said the other day how he is buddies with Putin and he's sure that Putin wants a deal. The Republicans hate Ukraine, and because there is an election coming up, and I think we've said this before, but it bears repeating, a vote for the Republican candidate, a vote for Donald Trump, is a vote against Ukraine. I dearly hope our listeners don't cast that vote.
That's really the point that needs to be hammered home here. The Republicans are extremely dangerous to the existence of Ukrainians as a people. I do not want to be tortured to death in a prison camp. I'm sure you don't either. And one way to make sure that doesn't happen is to vote Democrat. But yeah, it's just this rote idea that they have is that Russia interferes in American politics to support the Republicans. The Republicans don't like that accusation, even though it's true. And so they have to turn it around and say that Ukraine is the one who interferes with America. They did this during Russiagate, Ukrainegate, the whole thing. They've been saying this for a long time. And part of this complaint is that they demanded the resignation of the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova. And the reason they are doing that is because they are very used to taking, and especially, let's face it, female ambassadors and making them the front for everything they hate. They turned Marie Yovanovitch, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, from 2016 to 2019 as a major villain character in the Russiagate, Ukrainegate scandals.
Remember, in the Republican, like the official Republican narrative of Ukraine is that the CIA helped Ukraine do a coup, and that's why there's a war now. This is what their official narrative, Maidan and all of that, none of that matters. CIA coup, and Yovanovitch was one of the evil CIA corrupt people making corrupt deals with Hunter Biden and laptops and whatever other garbage and nonsense they say. They are just, quite frankly, an anti-Ukrainian party.
Yeah, and this is just a repeat of that. And it was very, very successful for them. By turning Yovanovitch into the villain, they were able to score a lot of points.
And they were able to force her out of her position. And she had death threats against her. She was on Capitol Hill talking about how the public Republican official attacks against her led to her feeling unsafe in the United States.
Yeah, just nasty stuff that they'll continue to do. But part of their proof for why this was, just supporting the Democrats was that there were no Republicans at this meetup. Now, the first thing that I would say is that, well, the governor is a Democrat. Like, what do you want him to do? Like, bring in a different governor? How about this? Invite Zelensky to, for example, the plant in Arkansas that produces the HIMARS system. Basically, the way that American defense is planned out, or defense spending is planned out, is that everyone kind of gets a piece. There is something in every state that contributes to the American military industrial complex. That's done on purpose to make sure that the jobs and tax revenues and all that from these factories, every politician can claim them. So maybe invite him to one of those places so you can show that we in Arkansas are vital to the defense of Ukraine, because it is. But they don't want to take credit for that, because if they did that, then it makes the case that supporting Ukraine supports the American economy through these companies. First, Trump invited Zelensky to Mar-a-Lago and he declined the invitation, yes. But they were trying to work something out. And it just all kind of fell through, as things sometimes do. But it wasn't until after this scandal, where all these problems of the Republican story were kind of pointed out, that eventually, yes, Trump agreed to do a press appearance with Zelensky. And it was perhaps the most awkward thing I've ever seen.
It was a press appearance first at Trump Tower in New York, there was a photo of it. So a little bit of Ukraine lore here. In Ukraine, it is unbreakable New Year's tradition to watch the Home Alone series on New Year's. I don't know why. I don't have any cultural context for this, but every single Ukrainian I know does this without fail, and they will get severely upset if you turn off Home Alone for a much better movie like Die Hard. In any case, it's a huge thing here. And there's a photo from this meet at Trump Tower. Home Alone 2 famously has a scene of young Macaulay Culkin meeting Donald Trump at Trump Tower, and he asks Trump for, I think, advice or directions or something.
It was directions, yeah.
Yeah, it was directions, and Trump shows him where to go. And there's a photo of Zelensky meeting Trump in the lobby of Trump Tower that really echoes that scene quite heavily. And I saw that photo, I couldn't help but thinking that I wonder if Z did that on purpose. He wanted a callback to Ukraine's most loved movie, Home Alone 2. Guest starring Donald Trump.
Well, forever an entertainer. But yeah, during this conference, it's short. Go watch it. It's funny.
Don't, because Donald Trump is there, and I personally make it a point of pride that I refuse to watch any media that involves Donald Trump, that features him, has his voice in a clip. I don't care if it has anything to do with Trump. I don't watch it. So you can just listen to us talk about it.
Fair enough. But yeah, it was rather short, and there's some points of it that still really stood out. And at first, Trump was saying how America has this great relationship with how Donald Trump, him personally, had this great relationship with Putin, to which Zelensky replied, well, I hope you have a better relationship with us. And yeah, that's kind of what everyone's hoping, and was going off of how, oh, Putin wants peace and how we'll make a deal right away and everyone wants a deal. This delusion that Trump thinks that he will be the deal maker that will solve anything when Russia does not and has never shown interest in peace.
On top of that, Trump isn't a free actor when it comes to Russia. He owes the Russians a lot of money. Being president did not solve that problem. He still owes the Russians a lot of money. His campaign machine is inextricably tied with Russian propaganda and Russian media and Russian spies. Like, the man doesn't have a free hand when it comes to Russia. Like, we clearly saw that during his presidency, where he is more than happy to bend over backwards if Putin asks him to.
Or this meeting, I think, is when the most damning statement happened, which was Trump saying that Ukraine no longer existed. Russia had already destroyed it. And so any deal whatsoever that allows some part of Ukraine to still call itself Ukraine is better than the alternative, which is the complete and utter destruction of Ukraine as a state and as a people. That is what is going on in his head. And really, what we are seeing here is a much more explicitly anti-Ukraine line from Trump. At this point, Trump himself has been kind of wishy-washy on the topic. He's said a lot of stupid things about making peace, like I said before, but now he is fully imbibing straight up just Russian talking points. And when we were talking in our Vance episode, we were saying how Trump policy is whatever the people around Trump are telling him. And people like J.D. Vance are the people telling Trump what his Ukraine policy will be. And they despise Ukraine, they despise Ukrainians, and they see Russia as a shining city on a hill that they want to emulate. That is the faction of the conservative Republican Party that will be deciding foreign policy, along with a lot of other policy, to be frank. So whatever Republicans out there who are in the John McCain tradition of supporting Ukraine, they are not at the table right now. J.D. Vance is what's at the table, and they're the ones feeding Trump what his opinions will be. Very frightening. So in November, I'll be in America for the election, see what I can do as far as canvassing is concerned, because this is an existential threat. Well, that's how we'll be signing off on this episode. So, plugging, voting for Kamala Harris. That's our main plug. Other ways to support Ukraine other than that are going to our link tree, looking to add sources of information, various charities and funds you can give to. If you would like to support Ukraine Without Hype, you can go to patreon.com/Ukraine Without Hype and join one of our tiers of support. So thank you very much to Deborah Grazer, Randy McNerlin. The voices in my head are from Big Pharma, David Shepard, Giorgio, Ivana Kokratskaya, Michael Drucker, Mike Perrone, Anna Karen Person, Anonymous, Barbara, Dennis, Devi, Dimitri Litvin, Etienne Soleil, James Burke, Jan, Yanara, Jenny Louise, Kevin Alberton, Kyle Smith, Marguerite, Michael Wickman, PLM, Shieldwall, Silas Frank, T. Bart, Vivek, Ada McDonald, Alex Groschmal, Anastasia, Andrew Glenn, Captain Technical, Chris Bennington, Christopher Yee, Daniel Spring, David Wall, Demetrio Munoz, Dish Taco, Emily Bavona, Evelyn, Francois, Grace Krause, Had to Laugh, Jacob Holm, James Wise, Jared Bradley, Jared, Julia Lindsay, Justin R., Kyle Johnson, Laura De Leon, Laurie Halila, Lemoninkin, Levy Grove, Marianne Obbs, Matt Miller, Melissa Casalco, Anonymous, Noah Brown, Noam Hart, RDK, Sanjay, Scott Burry, Scott Gengris, Scott Tokaryuk, Stuart Akers, Subtle Knife, Thomas Sobia, Ursula Zolenkoff, Veronica Aim, Victoria Leontineva, Zay Perry, and Marcus Nashkis. Thank you all very much for your support. And until next week, and there could be some interruptions in some of the weeks, like I said, because of travel. Till next week, Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава!